Hello, mate, to thrive. Well, it's all about brain health, mental performance, and that's what I've seen in corporate South Africa, entrepreneurs, business owners, leaders. It's really been sort of a pandemic here in Africa and beyond, the patients that I've dealt with. And that's why we had Dr. Drobot on the show. And now we've got Guy Odishaw, who's the founder of the Bhakti Clinic, and he is founder of and co-founder of CerebralFit. And we're going to be looking at a lot of these products and the research and his assessments, and a real pioneer craniosacral therapist, and it's been worked in manual therapy. We're talking offline, but a real privilege to have someone with so much wisdom, so many years of experience, so many certifications. And I just really want to warmly welcome you, Guy, to the show, because I think you've got a lot to share.
Thank you for the opportunity. Looking forward to it.
Brilliant. Let's jump into a case study that we were talking offline, just really because cognitive decline and looking at the cognoscopy that we're doing within our businesses that we're running here, and the people that we're working with, our clients, our patients, and that I think is really, really important. And you did mention that one of your clinics is a Dale Bredesen clinic, but I really want to talk about mental health and mental performance from those that are really struggling with things like brain fog and mental fatigue and maybe early onset signs of dementia, but who don't have a full diagnosis. And I know that your stats are incredible in terms of reversing and helping these people. So let's go through, avatar and archetype that people can really relate to.
Absolutely. So, and maybe I'll just say a little bit, like just a little bit of a meta commentary. So you mentioned the Bredesen Clinic. So I have a Bredesen Clinic where we have a Bredesen trained physician kind of at the head of that. And we do a robust implementation of the Bredesen protocol. So it's the full diet, lifestyle, supplements, that side, and then a full offering of the bioelectric medicine, which Dr. Bredesen has very much articulated in his whole protocol, but tends to get minimized both in his presentation, but most clinics, Bredesen clinics, either do none or very little of the bioelectric medicine. They highly implement the functional medicine side, but not the bioelectric. So we just happen to be in our coming together that we could do both. So I have that as a comparison over against CerebralFit, where CerebralFit, we have all of this access to the knowledge of Dr. Bredesen's protocol. So all of that plus Dr. Drobot's background in biological medicine. So he's kind of my physician on that side. So he's Dr. Cinda's, pair on the CerebralFit side. But on the CerebralFit side, we made the decision to go primarily bioelectric medicine with functional medicine or biological medicine kind of in the background. So it's a bit of the reverse of the Bredesen. And so I have these two clinics with very similar kind of operating procedures or paradigms. The only difference is emphasis. Bredesen, more functional medicine, and CerebralFit, more bioelectric medicine. And what I've had the opportunity to do in the comparison is to see that our folks who do bioelectric medicine do better. Like we have better outcomes on the CerebralFit side than on the Bredesen side. And the difference is the degree of implementation of bioelectric medicine, and the bias is in the paradigm, right? So that point can get easily missed, but I just want to say it's in the emphasis of the practitioner talking to the patient, and on one hand they're emphasizing diet, lifestyle, and supplements, and on the other side they're emphasizing bioelectric medicine with the other stuff in the background, right? So both sides, but one is being prioritized.
And that's what Dr. Drobot said. He said, like, you got to treat the organ. I mean, one of the biggest sort of means that it came away was, you got to treat the organ. If you're not treating the organ directly, you're not going to actually improve it to the degree that you'd like. So obviously it's quite interesting because I've been doing functional medicine for 17 years now. So that's why I'm so interested in bioelectric medicine, because I think it can just really support and aid. And do you have a comparison in sort of percentages of improvement between the standard Bredesen protocol and the protocol it's using with bioelectric medicine?
Yeah, so so this is an interesting one, right? Because if you look at the clinical stats, they're very comparable, right? Roughly around 85%. So Bredesen did his analysis recently. He came out like just plus or minus 85%. When we do our clinical analysis on the CerebralFit side, we come out about 85%. You go like, wow, they must be the same. But what's missing is the detail, right? Stats blur and you miss a lot when you look at those high level stats. So what do we see, in our Bredesen protocol? The people who do better, who are in that higher part of the 85% that are driving our leading edge, are implementing bioelectric medicine. Our Bredesen people who are not, who make the choice not to, well, they do less well. Now, they still get to check the box when you say, have you improved, in memory, or have you improved in ADLs? And they check the box and they say yes. But what the stats miss is, did that take them 8 months to get there versus our people doing bioelectric medicine got there in 2 months, right? How robust is that change, right? Like those are the things that I feel like the advantage I have of working in both patient populations is I get to live that nuance of
85% is a huge stat. I mean, what does that mean? Is that 50% better on memory, on ADLs, or, what is this rating, whether you've improved or not?
So how do we measure, how do we get to that 85%? Yeah, so it's a good question. Because, we like to say that, again, this mirrors what Dr. Bredesen says. We have our own way of languaging it and where it came from, but we say slow, stop, and reverse. Right? And so what that 85% doesn't pull apart for the person just looking at that number is like who in there, it just slowed their progress. Right? That still counts as a positive.
Yeah.
Right. So how do we get that? Well, it's not a fiction, but you have to look at normative numbers. What is a person's rate of decline? What can we say about a person who has a MoCA of this, like a standard measure of cognitive improvement in a simple model or a complex model? Where are they at? And then we predict out, like most people who are here end up at this point at 6 months, at 12 months, at 18 months, right? So that's a normative slope. Then we do a treatment and we say, well, we moved this person's endpoint. At 6 months, they weren't as bad as predicted. And at 12 months, not as bad as predicted. Yeah. So we say we've slowed theirs. Now, do we know if there was no treatment for that individual person that they wouldn't have had that slope? Well, we don't. And there's no way to know that, right? It's the problem of preventative medicine. You can't tell what would have happened if you didn't do treatment. It's the problem of multivariant treatment, and that's part of the problem of studying the Bredesen protocol as a whole, because you're not treating one variable and with a control group. You're treating 20 or 30 variables, and there's just a cohort, but not really a control group for that, right? So it perplexifies our idea of what we want to say statistically for the gold standard of a randomized placebo-controlled study that is single variable.
Gotcha.
So what nested in that 85 is at our lowest point somebody whose rate of decline is measured or quantified as improved. So they still went down, but they went down slower. So the next is the person who we're able to hold steady without decline. So they'd been declining before treatment at some rate, which you can kind of map out sort of loosely in any one individual. But then we can say over a period, and I've got a few folks that are like this, where we're 2 bordering on 3 years of treatment, where there's been no decline during that period of treatment, right? That's easier to say, like that is a meaningful outcome because there's more people, there's more power in the normative slope downwards. It's a degenerative condition. We expect, week over week, month over month, year over year decline. If you don't see that, that's a stronger indicator that there's a treatment effect, right? So we have that population. And then we have our people who improve. And these is an actual, apparent reversal of the symptoms. So, it gets challenging to to quantify this is like, is it a change in, memory? Is it a change in kind of ADLs and function? And what we're looking for is a return to normal. And normal is this bundled term that has all of those things in it. And so like maybe restoring short-term memory, that turns out to be one of the more challenging pieces. And so we can have a person, like, I have plenty of these folks, but take a, 65, 70, 65-year-old, woman who is 5 years into her dementia by the time she becomes a client of mine. Her day-to-day is with help, getting up out of bed, taken downstairs, put in a chair, sits in a chair all day, got up, taken upstairs, put into bed, and that's it. Like that's been her life for a year by the time I come along. And the husband is saying, is there anything you can do, or is she too far gone? Our next step is to put her in a home because the amount of care she needs is just exceeding what we can do here at home. And I have a general philosophy of it's never too late. And she's an example of where that came from is, I don't know, because I literally don't know when has somebody crossed a line that we just can't pull them back from. But what we do, which is we did the CerebralFit Complete. So photobiomodulation for the brain, photic entrainment, auditory entrainment, transcranial stimulation, nasal photobiomodulation, right? So these are my standard approach. We start doing that. And lo and behold, within a matter of weeks, there's a restoration of function. Within a matter of months, she's getting out of bed on her own. She's coming downstairs. She's having coffee with her husband, which she hasn't done for years. Next thing, she's coming downstairs and she's cooking breakfast. And it's a slow return back to something that, approximates her normal life.
Wow.
She starts driving again. She starts going and playing bridge with her girlfriends. She starts going to the grandkids' hockey games. They're traveling. The husband, messaged me on a pretty regular basis of, we got up this morning, we had breakfast. We haven't done that for years. We joked with each other. I was able to go to the office and work, which I hadn't been able to do for years. We went on a date, all of these just amazing things. Like, to me, that's what's compelling, not necessarily how did she do on a Shroot test? How did she do on a MOCA? Like, we do those, but again, like for me, that holds the least amount of interest.
Got you. There's the scientific data that you've done with the MOCA test, and we want to try and bring objective measurements. And then there's the empirical evidence that you've got as well. And I think we need both, and I think that's
absolutely
really important. And they both have their role and their place. So, just honor yourself and Bredesen for doing these numbers and getting them out there, because what it does is it does help people with different personalities and different outlooks embrace the treatment, which I think doesn't have much risk, but we'll get into that. But let's talk also about your CEO from a mental performance perspective that came in, because we have a lot of business people listening here and people that want to really have high mental performance, and doing the cognoscopy with a lot of entrepreneurs and working with groups like YPO and EO. Some of the numbers have not been where they need to be, and people need some type of actionable process. Yes, we can plug into the Bredesen functional medicine process and diet and nutrition and lifestyle and exercise, but I do think there's a missing piece in the bioelectrical part. So let us know about the CEO and what you did.
Yeah, absolutely. So we do have a part of the Bhakti Brain Health Clinic, which is more kind of our omnivorous, where we do a lot of mental health, traumatic brain injury, peak performance. So we have our peak performance folks. So the one that we were talking about before we came on is a CEO. He is 45, elite athlete, triathlons, Ironman, that kind of thing. Been doing those for years. Great physical condition. Has really handled most every segment of his life in terms of his health. Like many of these folks, like here locally, we have the Mayo is the big medical system. And so he's in the, Mayo executive program. So he had just come back from doing his annual executive checkup, where they use all the latest technology to check all the systems and all the blood work. And this is relevant in that as we were doing the process, so we did a QEG, right? So functional neuroimaging, we did ERP, so task-based functional neuroimaging. We do what's called a resonant frequency determination, which is like a QEG for the autonomic nervous system. So we look at the autonomics, central nervous system in a resting state, and then in an active state.
Maybe you can just unpack those three, because I know my audience is not well versed at all. Dr. Drobot was probably the first bioelectrical medicine specialist that we had on. So I think just even a QEEG, we have had Andrew, he'll talk about neurofeedback, but I think it'll be important for people to understand those tests and what they're testing.
Sure. So QEG, we do a 19 channel. So you've got a cap on your head with 19 sensors that are picking up the electrical activity of the brain at the scalp surface, and then uses all kinds of complex math. That's the Q in QEG. So EEG is electroencephalograph. The Q is quantitative. So when we take these measures of the electrical activity, and then we run it through 3 different artificial intelligence. Plus, the clinicians do a by eye analysis of the EEG. So we're looking at 19 channels of electrical activity separated into the different bandwidths of delta, theta, alpha, beta 1, 2, 3, and gamma. So that's what we're seeing this electrical activity broken out to. And then we're just looking to see is how this brain is internally moving energy and information, neurotypical. And so so we use Brodmann areas. So these are like maps on a location, or locations on a map, right? So the areas. So is Brodmann area 31 talking to Brodmann area 23 in the right way, right? So the right frequency at the right time. And so the analysis tells us that it's all this data is being compared to a normative database of peak performance brains. So it's how is this brain moving information through, say, the executive function network, and is it moving the information in a neurotypical way or not? And if not, specifically how? So we get very, very, very granular information that is what's called high in the temporal domain. So EEG is really good in a time series, but it's not great spatially, versus MRI, which looks at anatomy, is really good spatially, can tell you anatomically what's there, but it is very bad at telling you what's that doing, right? So our system, so functional neuroimaging is really about telling you what is that thing doing. You don't know the thing that you're looking at, but you know what it's doing in time. So we have very good temporal resolution to say, how is this area talking to that area? And then asking this question of, is that neurotypical? Brilliant. So that we do that resting state, eyes open, kind of see more of what's called the salience network. Then eyes closed, we see more of the default mode network. So 2 core networks for brain function. And then we do an ERP, or event-related potential, where the person is doing a task. Usually there's symbols flashing on a screen. When they see a certain symbol, they click a mouse. And this is a test of executive function and attention, to say, can you follow the rule? So when this symbol appears, you have to recognize it. Oh, that's my symbol. What was my rule? Click the mouse. Did I click the mouse? Right. So we're looking at the brain executing that task, and we look at how does that brain do it. And we learn a lot of information about how well is that brain functioning when it has just even a minimal cognitive demand. How does it perform that demand? And then we're looking at the resonant frequency analysis, where we're tracking the autonomic nervous system. So there we're looking at a number of metrics like respiration rate, cardiac rate, HRV, skin conductance, temperature, kind of a spectral analysis of like the rhythm of the heart, but not the rhythm as in like my heart beats 60 beats per minute. We're not looking at that. We're looking at like how is the heart accomplishing its job of regulating, as part of the autonomic nervous system, and regulating the supply of nutrients and oxygen and all of that, right? So we have basically 10 channels of data coming from the body that we use to determine how is the autonomic nervous system functioning, and then all this data from the brain and central nervous system, and then we put all that together to tell a story about what's up with a person's system.
Okay, brilliant.
So,
And then
so
with the
yeah,
CEO, so you would have got some
yeah,
results, and then you would have done what to change
sure,
the numbers?
yeah. So with him, when we did the QEG, uh, we saw some garden variety dysregulation, and we just expect that in any brain that there's going to be dysregulation, and so we have our measures of anything that's less than 1.5 standard deviations away from the neurotypical is subclinical. It's novelty of how that brain figured out how to solve the world, right? Okay, no problem. But you start to get into 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 standard deviations, like that's a problem. It's a real problem. So, everybody's got some. He had some, but he had some stuff that was not garden variety, that was a pretty clear biomarker for a brain injury. And so that, brought in the conversation. And sure enough, he'd had a brain injury, but one that he had really just written off. He'd sought care for it once, and again kind of felt like, I don't know, there's nothing there. And there was, from his brain function standpoint, it was one of the strongest biomarkers that I have seen. So a significant brain injury. His reason for coming in was really just feedback from his kind of trusted circle, saying that he seemed to maybe just like be a little bit off, like he's just like half a step off. And he didn't feel that that was true of him, but being the high performer he was like, I got to look into this, right? Like I'm getting feedback, I got to look into it. So he came and did this process. So what was part of the fun of working with him, and I thoroughly enjoy my executive folks, my peak performers, because like they want to be perfect, and that like highly motivated, right? And so
Mm.
they're very engaged. And so
Yeah.
he was. So we're doing this, and I'm giving him feedback. He's pulling up his executive, the results of his executive checkup at Mayo. And he's like, Guy, I've got all my blood tests right here. Excellent, 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 excellent. My calcium scan on my heart, excellent, everything. Like I could not be in better shape. But you're telling me I have this, dysregulation in my brain that looks like, impact from a brain injury, that my autonomics are in terrible shape. My HRV is 5. And as we talked about, like, so our system has a scale that just makes it clinically comparable from one person to another. This kind of gold standard in HRV, as you know, is kind of SDNN, and so our equipment just interprets that in a number that makes it easier for us in the software and in training to work with. But his SDNN was down in the low 40s, so that's bad for somebody who's a triathlete. And in our system, it's showing up on our scale as a 5, and that's bad. Because 3 is congestive heart failure, right? So you don't look at somebody who's in the shape that he is in. He's obviously, an elite athlete in terms of his conditioning, his diet, his discipline, everything about it. But his autonomics are running right next to somebody who's on the list as congestive heart failure. So this is bad. So we're having this conversation. He's pointing at all of his Mayo results, and that he's in great shape. And I'm saying, I don't think so.
Mm.
And so anyway, so we have this whole kind of running conversation. He's open to the idea, but he can't get it. Like, how did Mayo not pick this up? How could I have this problem that didn't come through in a blood test or in a scan or something? And part of that for our conversation is because nobody was looking from a bioelectric medicine standpoint at his system, right? They were looking at, an MRI was telling you about anatomy, but not function, right?
Yeah.
So we needed to bring out the function. So in his case, we had kind of one of his main presenting pieces that didn't come in his health history, but just came in actually side conversation. He talked about, one day when I'm wiring him up to do a treatment, he's talking about when he's at the cabin with the guys and they're sitting around, they all tease him that he can just fall asleep at any moment. Like just, 30-second lull in the conversation, he falls asleep. I'm like, okay, that's not normal. Like that's even exhausted people don't do that. And sure enough, we saw it demonstrated there in the training that he couldn't stay awake for 30 seconds. He would just nod off. And our trainings are not all that stimulating, right? Because part of them is a test of attention, the arousal system. Like, can a person stay engaged in an otherwise boring activity? He could not. And so that became the heart of what we trained. So what we did with him is we did transcranial stimulation, so alternating current stimulation. We did transcranial magnetic stimulation, and we did transcranial photobiomodulation, all for the brain injury. And then we did, in terms of biofeedback and training paradigm, operant conditioning, we trained his HRV. And so, it took a lot of time. And I will say, like, again, working in a peak performance setting, I encounter this often, which is what he wanted and what many folks who are at that level of life want is they want performance. They want to be measured as doing well. So he's trying everything he can to hack the system to get a good score, right? So that's what's of interest to him, is like, I want to do well. And so I have to, slowly, session by session, talk him out of performance mode and say, what we need is for your actual system to regulate, not for you to figure out how to get the software to tell you you're doing well, because you're manipulating your body to hack the system, right? Like, that is not going to help you. So it takes several sessions to get him to submit to the paradigm where he's actually going to have to let his nervous system do the work here. So not his mind, but his nervous system has to figure this out. And he has to sit there frustrated and let it happen, right? So again, my peak performance people do not like that. They're doers. They want to do this and be gone. Like, I got a guy, I know normal people take 40 sessions. Can I be done in 8 sessions? Right.
Mm-hmm.
And so just to be like, no, no, you can't. You can't do this. Your system is going to have to find its way back. We want to restore the natural intelligence of your autonomic nervous system to regulate your organ system every moment of the day. Not when you're here and you hack the system and then you walk out and your autonomic nervous system didn't learn anything and it goes back to its running the system poorly. We actually need to restore the intelligence in your autonomic nervous system so it does its job every moment of every day for the rest of your life. And so he was cooperative. He submitted, and sure enough, we were able to get him slowly where his HRV was, from 5 to 7 and then 10 and then 15. And he could stay awake for 40 minutes of training without any falling asleep, without having to slap himself in the face, without having to do something. He could just generate the internal arousal, right? His sympathetic nervous system could come online and do what it's supposed to do and regulate the system. And, he's gone on to notice that many positive things have changed, right? And, is it 100% in the work performance? Not really, but that wasn't really the problem. He was still able to do his job with a little slippage. It was more the resources it was taking for him to do that. And one of the places we had a conversation, when I asked him, is like, how do you do, say, with your wife, going for a walk and just having a conversation about life and the kids and all of that? It's like, yeah, that never happens. It's like, I can't do it. I don't have the attention. Right. I'm like, yeah, exactly. And do you have a sense if that's maybe impacting your relationship, how you guys are as a couple, the quality of life that you're having from your relationship, the quality of relationship with your children? Like, this is the area where your deficit is really showing up. And partly because you're taking the resources to make work still work. And sure enough, that's what he started to see change, was his ability to actually shift into a rest and digest and restore and regenerate mode when he was offline. So at home, he could take time to play with the kids. He could take time to have a conversation with his wife. He could slow down and be. And like, we all know that that's essential, right? We need that for the other side to really go well, like really go well, not just hit performance goals at work, but to show up with a capacity to hold space for challenging moments, to be creative in how we solve problems. All of those kind of soft skills. Those are what go away when our capacity for this other side diminishes. So in his case, that's what we saw happen, was his ability to actually regenerate and restore came back to him. So
And did his colleagues say that he's like the half a step that he lost, they noticed the difference, or did he?
Yeah, I mean, I haven't heard that feedback come back in that particular one, but what I am hearing are the stories that are more about his ability to kind of be with, like to enjoy, and to attend to, and not have either be fully stimulated so that he can stay engaged, or just turns off. And he was missing, it's like a transmission that only has, like, high gear. You can only drive at 80 miles an hour, or you're parked.
Yeah.
Right. Like, that's not a very effective vehicle. And that's what he was driving, was all the way on or all the way off.
Gotcha.
And what I tell people is, what we want is response flexibility. We want your nervous system to be able to regulate to the demand of the situation, whatever that is, right? So we want response flexibility. And so, like what his reason for coming in may have been a little bit of slippage, and maybe we get change there and maybe we don't, and maybe he'll come back and report that has shifted, or the feedback around him. But, like, to me, what's more important is he like, with a autonomic nervous system running the way his was running, his health trajectory was severely compromised. Because we know statistically, great statistics for decades, that heart rate variability is one of the best predictors for longevity. And not just longevity on an actuarial table, which happens, but also we can predict the lower a person's heart rate variability, the more encounters with the healthcare system they will have, the more significant those encounters will be, the poorer their outcomes will be from those encounters with the healthcare system. And they will generally be the folks that are trending down in terms of health, that likely equals an early death. Right? So the big statistic actuarially is people with a low HRV die earlier. And so people look at that as just a longevity piece. But what they don't factor in is the quality of life that it comes with that, because you don't just live perfectly healthy and then die.
Gotcha.
Generally, you have, disease states that start, you seek treatment, you don't get the optimal response to the treatment because your system is compromised. So you get a suboptimal response, and then that sets you up for the next thing and the next thing and the next thing, right? That lived experience is not the one any of us would pick for ourselves. So for him, likely the biggest changes are going to be his lived experience of quality of life, better relationships, and quite likely, just statistically, like, we don't know individually, but statistically, fewer encounters with the healthcare system, and probably longer life. Right?
Yeah.
Like to me, that's the happy story of his thing, of like his coming in, getting treatment, correcting this problem, is that side of it.
Yeah. Yeah, limit chronic disease, give him better health span, just give him a life where he's able to just be in a space where he doesn't have, no reserve because he's probably got home and had absolutely no reserve. So you're giving him reserve in many ways. So well done to you. An incredible story. And I'm sure you got many stories like that, having done this bioelectric medicine. And maybe you want to just define what that is because it's probably a very new term for people that are listening.
Yeah, thank you. Great question. So our kind of comparison is biochemical medicine. So we can think of that as most, top of the heap is pharmaceutical medicine, right? So we use a chemical to affect the chemical electric gradient at the level of the cell, tissue, organ, whatever level we want to talk about. But it's using the a chemical to affect the chemical electric gradient. But you can also put into there functional medicine using supplements, chemicals to affect the chemical electric gradient. You could put in nutrition using, because although all of this has another side to it, but the concept of what, if you look at the literature, you listen to a practitioner, they're thinking about the chemical side. So we talk about food, and it's this nutrient, this micronutrient is, you need more magnesium, you need whatever because that, right? So we're all thinking chemical. So there's been for, well, thousands of years, if we look at Chinese medicine or Ayurvedic medicine or Tibetan medicine, there's been a concept of an electrical side. And even in Western medicine, we have hundreds of years of thinking about the electrical side of our chemical electric being. But it's not until relatively recently that we've seen the electrical side start to move forward and come out of the shadows because it got eclipsed by the chemical side. And so there's a way in which we could say, if we want to be reductionist, we're chemical electric beings. Now, I would say we're more than that because I would say we have a soul and all of these other things that can't
Correct.
be reduced to physics. But if we just say chemical electric, so bioelectric medicine is then looking at the electrical side of it and saying, well, what can we bring to bear to shift the electrical gradient at the level of the cell, tissue, organ, organism, whole person, and do that from an electrical understanding, not from a chemical understanding. And so in its simplest form, that's bioelectric medicine.
Okay,
And
brilliant. So with
I'll,
these
I'll,
people, do you take a current, like a transcranial electrical stimulation, and you put a machine or electrodes on there, and then the transmagnetic stimulation, transcranial magnetic stimulation? Just maybe just explain exactly all these stims and obviously, the research behind them, because now you're putting an electrical or magnetic stimulation on a brain or an organ. What is the research like, and
sure.
how many clinics are doing this, and what is the double-blinded study saying about this, or the meta-analysis saying about this?
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. So, wow, like that's a big series of questions. I love it. One of my favorite things to talk about. So you talk about meta study. There's a great meta study putting transcranial stimulation um, over against SSRIs, and so something like Alpha Stim, which is a brand, but it's a very simple ear clips, transcranial current. We have a device that does it. There's lots of, you just go out there,
But
they're
let's
all
just
over.
talk about that because I think that's important. People are going to listen to this, and then I'm like on your website now, CerebralFit. Like, is it something that they can look at here? Which is the one that you do?
Sure.
So Cerebral Brit Bioelectric,
Yep.
there's
If
sessions. Yeah.
yeah, on this current conversational thread right now, if somebody wanted to say, okay, what's a device
Mm,
that I could find that does what you're talking about. So
yeah.
the audiovisual entrainment device, so
Yes.
the Delight Pro on our side that does visual entrainment, auditory entrainment, and transcranial stimulation. And that's, so right now we're talking about transcranial stimulation.
This is a David Delight Pro.
Correct. The David Delight Pro. Yep. Yep. So great device, best in class for sure. Um, um, so we just talk about the transcranial stimulation. So, like so much to be said. So the meta study was on something like that, a device like that, right? That basically showed a 300% improvement over SSRIs, right?
Wow.
With no side effects. No side effects versus SSRIs, series of side effects, right? But transcranial stimulation, zero side effects, 300% improvement in outcomes. And that's a meta study, but that has been shown over and over and over and over and over again.
And
And
what's
again,
the usage, Guy? Do you have to use it every day, 10 minutes, 5 minutes?
sure.
Where's the
Yep.
usage?
So yeah, so it's going to, of course, be specific because again, the way we think about it is we don't treat a condition, say like anxiety, because from our perspective, there is no thing called anxiety, right? Anxiety is an experience that we label, right? But where it comes from, there's 1,000 different things that produce this thing called anxiety, right? So from our side, we kind of like to have a little bit of an insight into what's likely the cause of this person's anxiety. And so, because again, what we think we do is we regulate dysregulation in the living system. So we don't treat, a diagnostic code. We regulate dysregulation. So there's always like a little bit of a tension in talking from a diagnostic label or a set of symptoms, and then what do we do for treatment? We don't always know. Sometimes we just need to go with the person says, I have anxiety. Great. What do I do? Here's a general treatment for your general topic. And generally it works. But like everything, if we could be specific, we'll get better outcomes, right? And that's the process I do with people, is try to get as specific as we can, whether that's virtual or if they're in clinic where we can do testing and we say we do a QEG, so we find out. Anyways, so, but just to stay on the what are we doing from a bioelectric standpoint, right? So we're putting in a tiny current, right? So the body runs on microcurrent, cellular activity, nerve conduction, all of it. We have microcurrent running in our system all day, every day. We run on microcurrent, right? So we're putting in essentially a bioidentical current, and its effect on the brain, there's numerous, but the base one is it normalizes the resting membrane potential of a neuron. So what does that mean? So every neuron has an activation barrier, right? So how much stimulus does it take to cause that neuron to fire? So what we generally say, and this is very loose language, is more metaphor than science, but we need to be able to talk about it simplicity, right? Simply. So we think of anxiety as there's too many neurons that have a low activation barrier, so they fire too easily. So too little stimulus causes a response. And we think of depression as the opposite. The neurons have a higher activation barrier, and so they need more stimulus to get them to fire, right? It's very muddy, analogy, but it does fit. So what we want to do is we want to take the neurons and normalize, bring them back to their endogenous level of need for stimulation to fire. And that's what a transcranial magnetic current does, that across the board. It's a reliable, reproducible, steady effect of transcranial stimulation is we normalize the resting membrane potential. And that just helps a brain as a whole move towards neurotypical in its functioning. And that base change is huge. It takes in so many conditions. Why is transcranial stimulation? You look at the research literature. And again, you asked about research. If you do a Google Scholar search, you're going to find about 3.5 million studies and papers on electrical stimulation. Right? There is no shortage of evidence. Right? There's
Wow.
massive studies, decades and decades and decades, millions of of occurrences of this, very well studied. As we move into some of the somewhat more modern, the number go down. But if, say, we go to photobiomodulation, if we looked at the number of studies, kind of to date for 2023, I've not looked for 2024, but 2023 for photobiomodulation in the brain, we're probably around 20,000.
Wow.
I mean, that's a lot. And so there's no shortage of evidence. Absolutely no shortage of evidence. I sit in on the Boston Mass General Photobiomodulation Grand Rounds, and you've got researchers, clinicians, manufacturers from around the world talking about the latest research. And I mean, every time there's one of these conferences, we have an evolution in the update of what we think and what we thought, because there's so much research being done that you meet monthly with the people that are doing the research, doing the clinical application. And it's like everybody's starting from scratch again, because it's like, oh my God, like we know this now, right? So there's just so much happening in this area. Yeah, it's absolutely.
So now, is there a difference between the David Delight that's trans electrical stimulation? People can buy this, or they can do it in your clinic. And where does the transmagnetic stimulation or transcranial magnetic stimulation come in? Is that a different device?
It's a different device. Yep. So the David Delight doesn't have magnetic. We don't have a magnetic device up on the site. And there's a couple of reasons for that. We use it in the clinic, but I'm just going to say my own bias here is I'm not a huge fan of transcranial magnetic, or really any magnetic. Could be on the body, doesn't have to be on the brain. And the general reason, we have devices. I don't really push them with clients, because what I see personally and in our clinic is we have better results with electricity and light than with magnetism. And so what I want to try and do is be as precise as I can in delivering a current to the system, to move the system in a reliable, repeatable, predictable way. And electricity is more that than when you turn it into a magnetic field, you lose all kinds of control over the stimulus. And therefore the effect becomes more general, which can be fine.
Yeah.
But my bias is, if we can be more specific, don't we want to? And so generally I lean more towards an alternating current or a direct current or photobiomodulation versus magnetic.
Okay.
A lot of people would argue with me and tell me that I'm just completely wrong, and I'm fine with that. Like, it's like, yeah, like I'm okay. As a practitioner, this is where I've landed, but I'm not anti. I don't think there's any problem with it. It's perfectly safe, healthy, helpful. For me, it's just like being able to orient it to get a specific effect.
Yeah.
That's clinically important to me. Yeah.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
And then we're coming to the end of the show. So just want to talk about the photobiomodulation side. So do they have to use the helmet in your clinic? What do they do at home? Do they use LEDs? Just give them some sort of understanding in terms of the light therapy.
Yeah. So let's see. So in general, light therapy, what I think is completely missing from just the average person's kind of lexicon is human beings do photosynthesis, just like plants do, right? We've all been kind of led to believe that photosynthesis is a plant thing and not a people thing. But no, our bodies manufacture something in the area of about 1,400 different chemical components because of sunlight. So we're all familiar with vitamin D, and you get sun and you produce vitamin D, but there are 1,399 more, right? Like, I mean, we produce a lot of chemicals because of light. So we photosynthesize. So I think that's just an important thing to start with. Doing light therapy is not strange. It's not weird. It's not alternative. It's not a surprise. It's not like, oh, how did that happen? It's like, we evolved in the sun, right? We need light to function. And doing light therapy is just taking a narrow band of the sunlight and saying, we're going to apply this narrow band because it does this well and doesn't do all these bad things, right? So we're going to use red or near infrared because almost all of the medicinal qualities, the nutrient qualities of light are in red and near infrared. Now, not all of them, because you can have orange and green and yellow and the things. Blue has its place, but too much is not good. But if we just want to talk about the most beneficial, it's red and near infrared. So all we're doing is taking that out of the light spectrum, cutting out the blue, cutting out the UV, the things that can be damaging at higher doses, and just taking the good, right? That's all we're doing. Very simple. How you put it on your body, in a way, doesn't matter, right? So you can have a incandescent red or near infrared. You can have LED. You can have laser. If you have laser, you've got all of the contraindications of laser. You got to be careful with it, right? It's high density. It's bad for eyes used in the wrong way, but there's a lot of wrong ways with lasers and eyes. But if you're doing LED, we have virtually no concerns about eyes and LED and red near infrared light. It's a treatment. We use it in macular degeneration, have people look into a red or a near infrared light. It's a treatment. It's amazing. So my mantra for light therapy is light on skin, right? Like this, that simple. Whether you have a panel or a bulb or a high-tech device like our helmet, doesn't really matter. It's light on skin, it's photons. Now, what starts to change is just practicalities, as human beings. If we want to treat our brain, it's nice to be able to put a helmet on, right? And we can take one of these here, right? I can just take my helmet and I can put it on and I do this, I can sit at my desk like I do most mornings and I can do my photobiomodulation while I'm officing, right? Like just super convenient. So the helmet has a form factor to it, but what it has in it is LED lights, and they're not different than, say, the LED lights in a panel system or in a bulb. What starts to change is the form factor. How easy is it to use? How much of that light is being directed onto the organ or tissue that you want to treat versus how much is scattering, right? So these are the things that kind of make up the difference. But we talked earlier about, like, let's say somebody wants to treat their brain, and the helmet at $3,300 is just out of their price range. A couple things. One, we rent all of our devices. So if a person wants to just try and see, will I do it? Will it be helpful? They can rent a device. Great. That's easy. Rent goes towards purchase. So you can start renting and turn that into a purchase. You don't lose anything. Fantastic. But we could go from, $3,300 for the helmet down to $1,000 for one of our high power panel systems. And you can take that panel system and lay down and put it over, and you can do kind of a facial/brain treatment. There's all kinds of ways you can get that light into your brain. So you're still treating your brain, but we've moved a step away from the simplicity and the form factor. But then we can go down to another panel system that is going to come in at about $500, right? So now we're down at $500. Less power, all the same things around form factor, and it's just fussier, but still a great option. Then we can go down to something like $120, where we're using a high power LED bulb and a lamp, and you just sit under the lamp with the bulb on your head and treat, right? So now you're at $120, and you're still doing a perfectly good photobiomodulation treatment for your brain, but it's a little fussier on how you do it, right? And then we could go down, all the way down to the nasal laser, where you literally have two lasers that you stick in your nose that shines light up on the underside of the brain, and you've got that. So we've got this range of devices that all they really do is produce photons. And all the person wants to do is get those photons into the body. And everything else is performance and form factor.
Brilliant. Well, you've given us a really nice summary on transcranial magnetic, transcranial electrical, and transcranial photobiomodulation. So I think it's amazing what you're doing. I really want to connect with you and offline and have some meetings and how we can bring more of this to South Africa. There are people sort of spaced out, but not putting all those three together, as far as I know, and also making it available to patients and clients. Because I've never seen mental performance plummet like this in the last 4 years or 25 years in practice. I've never just seen brain fog and just adrenal burnout and mental fatigue, and like never before. I think our central nervous systems have taken probably the biggest hammering. And South Africa was rated the second most stressful country to live in the world by Bloomberg. So we're in this sympathetic overdrive like never before. And so yeah, I just want to say thank you and just declare favor and blessing over you, Guy. You're doing incredible work. According to just having a look at your sites and your clinics and Dr. Drobot, and really pioneering in this space. And we do need a different model. I love functional medicine. I love the biochemical model, but we've got to stay open and grow and put more tools in our toolboxes. And I think this is, a big missing piece for at least in South Africa for many, many, many people. So thank you so much.
Thank you. It was a delight chatting with you, and I look forward to more.